I want to say I didn't know. I want to sit here behind this barricade of overturned filing cabinets and shattered biosafety glass and tell you I was innocent. That when I swiped my badge at the entrance to Sublevel 4 of the Meridian Research Institute every morning for 3 years, I had no idea what we were building in the cold rooms behind the secondary containment doors. But that would be the first lie. And if I'm going to tell this story, the real story, the one the outside world will never hear from any official channel, I owe you at least the raw, unvarnished version. My name is Dr. Elliot Rains. I was a molecular virologist. And 7 days ago, I helped end the world. It started on a Tuesday. Not with a bang, not with an alarm. With a mouse. I was running post-inoculation behavioral panels on our NRX7 cohort. 24 white mice in sealed polycarbonate cages on the third rack of Vivarium C. The protocol was simple. Inject a modified lentiviral vector carrying our latest neural binding payload. Observe for 72 hours, log motor function, aggression markers, feeding patterns, standard stuff. We'd been doing it for 14 months. NRX1 through NRX6 had all shown moderate promise and moderate failure in roughly equal measure. The kind of incremental progress that keeps a defense contract funded without ever producing anything that changes the conversation in Washington. But NRX7 was different. Dr. Lena Corin had designed the binding architecture herself, bypassing the committee review by folding it into an existing approved framework. Lena was like that. Brilliant in a way that made oversight feel like friction. She was my project partner, my closest colleague, and, if I'm being honest, the person whose approval I craved more than any grant committee's. She had dark eyes that carried calculation and warmth in equal measure. And when she told me NRX7 was going to be the one, I believed her. Not because the data supported it, because she said it with that particular stillness in her voice that meant she'd already seen the outcome in her mind and was simply waiting for reality to catch up. Tuesday morning, 6:47 a.m. I entered Vivarium C with my coffee and my tablet, and I noticed the smell first. Copper and ammonia, sharp enough to cut through the recirculated air. Cage 7R had a breach, not mechanical. The latch was intact. But the polycarbonate wall had a crack running diagonally from corner to corner, and the mouse inside, subject 7R19, was pressed against it. Not moving, just pressed. With its forepaws flat against the fracture, its black eyes open and fixed on me. The other 23 mice were dead. Not just dead, disassembled. Fur and tissue distributed across the cage floors in patterns that didn't look like fighting. They looked organized, symmetrical, as if something had taken them apart with purpose. I set down my coffee. I remember that detail because of what it says about me. That my first instinct was not to trigger the containment alarm, not to call Lena, but to protect my mug from contamination. 3 years in a biosafety level 4 facility, and my reflex was custodial. I pulled up the overnight surveillance feed on the Vivarium monitor. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. when it began. Subject 7. 19 started seizing, not the typical tonic-clonic pattern we'd seen in earlier cohorts, but something faster, more architectural, as though its nervous system was being rewritten in real time. Within 90 seconds, it was still. Within 5 minutes, it was moving again. But differently. There was a fluidity to it, an intentionality, that made my stomach tighten. It killed the first cage mate at 2:22 a.m. By 3:15, it had breached the internal partition to the adjacent cage. By 4:40, all 23 were gone, and Subject 19 returned to the cracked wall and pressed itself flat against the polycarbonate and waited. For what? I didn't know yet. But it was looking at the door. My door. I finally called Lena. You need to come down to Vivarium C, I said. I know, she replied. And the fact that she said I know instead of why should have told me everything. It would take me another 48 hours to understand what those two words really meant. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to listen to regular zombie survival stories. Stay with us for new stories. Thank you. Lena arrived in 11 minutes. She didn't bring her tablet. She brought Dr. Marcus Hale, our division's biosafety officer, and two security contractors I'd never seen before. Thick-necked men in unmarked tactical gear who positioned themselves at the vivarium entrance without being told where to stand. That choreography alone was a confession. Marcus was a careful man, 53, ex-Army Medical Corps, with a meticulousness that bordered on liturgical. He wore his reading glasses on a chain around his neck like a talisman. When he saw the cages, he removed those glasses and cleaned them slowly, which was his way of keeping his hands from shaking. When did it present? He asked. Overnight. The surveillance logs everything. I'm not asking about the surveillance. I'm asking when you noticed. 40 minutes ago. He looked at Lena. Something passed between them. A frequency I wasn't tuned to. She gave a slight nod. Elliot, Marcus said, we're going to need you to step out of the vivarium. Contractors will handle specimen recovery. Handle it how? That's my cohort. The behavioral data is no longer your concern. He said it without cruelty, but with a finality that carved a line between us. On one side was the version of this project I'd understood. On the other was whatever Lena and Marcus had been carrying in silence. I stepped out. The contractors entered in full MOPP gear, military grade, not the commercial suits we kept in the prep room. They had equipment I didn't recognize. A portable containment pod with electromagnetic seals. A handheld device that emitted a low-frequency pulse I could feel in my molars. They extracted Subject 19 in under 4 minutes. I watched through the observation window as they carried it out. The mouse was conscious inside the pod, still pressing against the wall, still watching. Lena found me in the corridor afterward, leaning against the wall with a kind of exhaustion that comes not from labor, but from the sudden awareness of ignorance. You owe me an explanation, I said. I owe you several. She sat beside me on the hallway bench, close enough that I could smell the antiseptic soap she always used, laced with something floral underneath. NRX-7 wasn't designed the way you think. Meaning what? Meaning the binding payload you helped construct was a carrier. The real package was folded underneath. A secondary instruction set targeting the limbic system, specifically the amygdala and the anterior cingulate. My training caught up before my emotions did. You weaponized it. I optimized it. There's a difference. There's really not. She didn't argue. She pulled out her phone and showed me a document. A directive from Meridian's parent corporation, Ashcroft Dynamics, dated 16 months earlier. The language was dense with euphemism, but the core instruction was legible enough. Develop a transmissible neural override agent with controllable aggression amplification and reduced higher-order executive function in primate subjects. They wanted a weapon that could turn people into something less than people. And they wanted it to spread. You've been running a parallel protocol, I said. Inside my study. Inside our study. Your vector design made it possible. The binding affinity you engineered for NRX-5 was the breakthrough. I just applied it to a different target. I wanted to be angry. I was angry. But beneath the anger was something colder. Recognition. I'd seen the anomalous binding data in NRX-5. I'd flagged it as an artifact. I hadn't pursued it because the grant didn't require me to, and because not pursuing it meant I could keep believing in the clean version of what we were doing. Subject 19 killed 23 mice in 2 hours, I said. It cracked polycarbonate. Yes. That's not aggression amplification. That's something else entirely. Lena's jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw something behind her composure that looked like fear wearing a mask of scientific detachment. I know, she said again. Those same 2 words. The secondary instruction set appears to have iterated beyond the designed parameters. It evolved. It adapted. There's a difference. You keep saying that, and it keeps not being true. She didn't answer. Somewhere below us, in a containment pod built for battlefield pathogens, a mouse was pressing against a wall, waiting. And I realized with a slow, sickening clarity that it wasn't waiting for food or escape or stimulus. It was waiting for the wall to give. For the next 36 hours, Meridian operated under what Marcus called enhanced internal protocol, which in practice meant that Sublevel 4 became a closed system. Badge access was restricted to 12 personnel. External communications were routed through a dedicated Ashcroft relay that stripped metadata and flagged keywords. We were told this was precautionary. We were told Subject 19 was an outlier, a singular expression of a replication error that would be analyzed, documented, and neutralized. I almost believed it. Almost. But I'd spent 3 years in a building designed to contain things that shouldn't exist. And I'd learned that the architecture of reassurance is always built on the same blueprint: restrict information, project calm, and keep the people who ask questions away from the people who have answers. I was one of the people who asked questions, so they put me on data review. A task that sounded important but amounted to sitting in a windowless office on Sublevel 2, cross-referencing NRX7 inoculation logs against a database I wasn't given full access to. Busy work dressed in the language of diligence. But I had Tomas. Dr. Tomas Vieira, our computational biologist, occupied the office next to mine and had the particular gift of being underestimated by everyone who outranked him. He was 31, wiry, with a habit of drumming his fingers on surfaces when he was thinking and going perfectly still when he'd reached a conclusion. He'd been at Meridian for 2 years, brought in to model transmission pathways for conventional biodefense scenarios. He was not read into the NRX project. He was not supposed to know what was happening on Sublevel 4. He knocked on my door Wednesday evening with 2 cans of energy drink and a flash drive. I pulled the air handling telemetry for the vivarium wing, he said, setting a can on my desk. Particulate filters registered a spike at 2:14 a.m. Tuesday. Protein signatures consistent with aerosolized biological material. You're not supposed to have access to air handling data. And you're not supposed to be locked in an office while your cohort gets classified. Yet here we both are. He sat down and cracked his drink. Elliot, whatever came out of that mouse went airborne. The filtration caught most of it, but the recirculation loop for Sublevel 4 shares a junction node with Sublevel 3. I felt the room contract. Sublevel 3 was the primate wing. 46 rhesus macaques in individual enclosures, used for cognitive studies unrelated to our work. Has anyone checked the primates? I sent a query to Dr. Fenn's team 2 hours ago. They told me the primates were fine and to mind my own research lane. That's not an answer. No, it's a deflection, which is why I went down there myself. Tomas pulled up a video on his phone. The footage was shaky, taken quickly, furtively, from the observation corridor of Primate Housing Block A. Through the reinforced glass, I could see 6 macaques in their individual enclosures. 5 were behaving normally, grooming, eating, moving with the idle restlessness of captive animals. The 6th was pressed against the front wall of its enclosure. Forepaws flat, eyes fixed forward, motionless. The same posture, the same patience. "That's enclosure 14, Tomas said, the closest unit to the shared air junction. "When did it start?" The behavioral change appeared on yesterday's automated welfare check. Dr. Fenn's team logged it as reduced activity. They didn't flag it. Because they don't know what to flag it against. Exactly. I put down the energy drink. The aluminum was cold against my palm, and the sensation grounded me enough to think clearly. If the NRX-7 payload had crossed into the primate wing through an air handling junction, we were no longer dealing with a single anomalous mouse. We were dealing with a transmissible agent that had jumped environmental containment through passive aerosolization and was now expressing in a higher-order mammal. "We have to tell Marcus," I said. "Marcus already knows." Tomas pulled up a second file on the flash drive, a containment log showing that Marcus had ordered the shared air junction sealed at 4 a.m. Wednesday, 12 hours before anyone told me Subject 19 was an anomaly. 12 hours before anyone told me to sit in this office and review data I couldn't access. They knew. They'd known since the beginning. And instead of sounding the alarm, they sealed the junction and hoped the architecture would hold. "Elliot," Tomas said, his fingers perfectly still. "The architecture isn't going to hold." Thursday morning, day 3. I woke at 5:15 in the sub-level 2 dormitory, a row of narrow cots behind the server room that smelled like recycled air and industrial carpet. Most of us had stopped going home. Not because we were ordered to stay, but because the world outside Meridian had started to feel like a place we didn't fully belong to anymore. We carried a secret in our blood now. Not literally, not yet. But the knowledge itself was a kind of infection, rewriting our relationship to every mundane surface and every ordinary breath. I found Tomas already awake in the commissary, hunched over his laptop with the intensity of a man trying to outrun his own calculations. He'd been modeling transmission rates using the particulate data from the air handling system, cross-referenced against known aerosolization decay curves for lentiviral payloads. His conclusions were on his screen in a simple graph with a curve that climbed like a cliff face. If the macaque in enclosure 14 is producing viable aerosolized particles at even 10% the rate Subject 19 demonstrated, he said without looking up, the primate wing's independent air loop will reach saturation threshold by tomorrow night. And if it's higher than 10%, then it already has. I sat down across from him. The commissary was empty, except for Dr. Nina Chowdhury, our immunologist, who was eating a granola bar in the corner with the mechanical precision of someone fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. Nina was 50, British Kenyan, with a voice that could deliver catastrophic data with the cadence of a bedtime story. She'd been largely silent since Tuesday, processing the NRX-7 revelation through whatever internal framework she used to reconcile 20 years of vaccine research with the discovery that her employer had been engineering the opposite. "Nina," I called across the room, "if this thing is transmissible through aerosol in primates, what's the realistic probability it expresses in humans?" She chewed, swallowed, folded the granola wrapper into a precise square. Lentiviral vectors with the binding affinity you and Lena designed were optimized for human neuronal tissue. The mouse expression was proof of concept. The primate expression is confirmation. If it reaches human respiratory epithelium with sufficient viral load, it won't need to adapt. It's already home. The silence that followed had a physical texture, dense, fibrous, like something you could reach out and tear. I went looking for Marcus. I found him on sub-level 3, outside Primate Housing Block A. standing with Lena and two Ashcroft executives I'd seen once before during a quarterly review. A man named Hargrove and a woman named Chen. Hargrove was tall, silver-haired, with the cultivated stillness of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that destroyed things from a comfortable distance. Chen carried a tablet and spoke in data points. The observation window behind them showed the primate wing. Through the glass, I counted. 12 macaques were now pressed against their enclosure walls. 12, up from 1 in 48 hours. Same posture, same fixed gaze, same inhuman patience. "We need to evacuate this facility," I said. Hargrove turned to me with the mild interest of a man watching a dog perform an unexpected trick. "Dr. Rains, you're not cleared for this level." 12 primates are displaying coordinated post-exposure behavioral changes consistent with the NRX7 anomaly. The air handling system shared a junction between levels. Your containment is porous. Every hour we spend managing this internally is an hour the exposure window widens. "The containment is adequate," Chen said. "The junction is sealed. The primate wing operates on an independent recirculation loop. We're monitoring. You were monitoring Subject 19 when it cracked polycarbonate and killed 23 cage mates." Lena stepped forward. "Elliot, walk with me." She guided me down the corridor with a hand on my elbow. A gesture that was half solidarity, half steering. When we were out of earshot, she stopped. "I hear you, but Hargrove controls the containment response team. If you push him, he'll revoke your access entirely, and you'll be sitting in a surface-level holding room when this escalates. When, not if. When, not if." She held my gaze. "Which is why I need you inside, not outside. I need someone who understands the vector architecture to be present when this thing moves. Because it will move, Elliot. And when it does, Hargrove's containment protocols are going to fail. And the only people who can stop it will be the ones who built it." Thursday night. The facility hummed with a frequency I'd never noticed before. Not mechanical, not electrical, but atmospheric. As though the building itself had developed a pulse. I was in my sub-level 2 office reviewing Thomas's transmission models when the first alarm sounded. Not the full containment klaxon, a localized alert from Primate Housing Block B. The secondary wing, the one that wasn't supposed to be affected. I ran. The corridors of sub-level 3 were designed for controlled movement, wide enough for equipment carts, lined with impact-resistant paneling, lit by overhead fluorescents that cast everything in the same antiseptic pallor. I reached Block B's observation corridor in under 3 minutes and found Tomas already there, standing motionless at the window. Inside, the scene was geometrically wrong. Block B housed 18 macaques. All 18 were awake, which at 11:40 p.m. was itself abnormal. These were diurnal animals with regulated light cycles. But they weren't just awake. They were arranged, pressed against the front walls of their enclosures in a single uniform line, forepaws flat, eyes forward, not watching each other, watching the corridor, watching us. "The independent air loop," I said. "Doesn't exist." Tomas's voice was flat. "I traced the schematics tonight. The independent loop for Block B shares a return vent with the main sub-level 3 exhaust. It was a cost-saving measure during the 2019 renovation. Nobody updated the containment documentation. A cost-saving measure. Somewhere, an accountant had signed off on merging 2 air pathways to save $250,000 in ductwork. And that signature had just extended the NRX7 exposure radius to every living thing on sub-level 3. Nina arrived behind us, breathless. She'd been monitoring the exposure data remotely from sub-level 2 and had seen the Block B alarm trigger on her dashboard. She looked through the window, counted the macaques, and said something in Swahili that I didn't understand but whose tone needed no translation. All 18, she confirmed. Simultaneous onset. That's not a gradual aerosol exposure curve. That's a threshold event. They all reached critical viral load at roughly the same time, which means the air concentration in Block B has been building for days. What about the human spaces? I asked. Sub-level 3 has 6 offices and a prep room. Nina pulled up the facility's personnel tracker on her phone. 4 staff members have been working on sub-level 3 since Tuesday. Dr. Fenn's team, Fenn, Rodriguez, Kwame, and a research assistant named Jesse Park. I knew Jesse, 26, a first-year research assistant from Johns Hopkins, bright and nervous in the way of people who suspect they're smarter than their supervisors, but haven't yet developed the confidence to act on it. She brought pastries to Friday meetings and asked careful, incisive questions that made senior staff uncomfortable. Have any of them reported symptoms? I asked. There are no established human symptoms to report against, Nina said. We don't have a human presentation model. We have a mouse that killed its cage mates and 40-some primates that are standing in formation at midnight. The overhead fluorescence flickered. A brief stutter, no more than half a second. But in that fractional darkness, I saw something that rearranged my understanding of the threat. The macaques didn't react to the light change. Animals startled by sudden darkness. It was a universal mammalian reflex. These animals were beyond startle. Their nervous systems had been rewritten past the point where environmental stimuli registered as relevant. The only stimulus that mattered was on the other side of the glass. I called Marcus. His phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I called Lena. Same result. I called the facility's security desk on sub-level 1. A contractor answered, not one of the unnamed tactical men from Tuesday, but a regular night shift guard named Dennis, who sounded like he'd been asleep. I need an immediate lockdown on sub-level 3, I said. All personnel evacuated, all ventilation sealed, full biological containment protocol. Doctor, I don't have authorization to initiate a full lockdown. That comes from Dr. Hale or Mr. Hargrove. Neither of them is answering. Then I can log the request and escalate when. Dennis, listen to me carefully. In approximately 12 hours, this facility is going to experience a containment breach that will make every protocol in your manual irrelevant. I need you to act now. The line was quiet for 4 seconds. Then Dennis said, I'll log it, sir. He logged it. Friday, day 4. I woke to find Lena sitting on the edge of my cot. She looked different, not disheveled, because Lena never allowed herself to appear unraveled, but compressed, as though gravity had increased selectively around her. Her eyes had a redness at the edges that could have been fatigue or tears. And I didn't ask which, because the answer didn't matter as much as the fact that she was here, in the dormitory, at 4 a.m., instead of in the secure lab where she'd been spending her nights. Fenn's team is symptomatic, she said. I sat up. The cot's metal frame creaked beneath me, absurdly loud in the quiet. All 4? Rodriguez and Kwame presented first. Elevated aggression response, reduced verbal output, fixation behaviors. Jesse Park noticed the changes at around midnight and tried to leave sub-level 3. She found the stairwell access sealed. Marcus's lockdown? Hargrove's. He finally authorized it at 1 a.m. after Rodriguez put his fist through a glass partition for no apparent reason. But the lockdown sealed Jesse and Dr. Fenn inside with them. The logic was suffocating in its cruelty. Contain the exposed by locking them in with the infected. Sacrifice 4 to protect the rest. It was the same calculus that had led Ashcroft to build this weapon in the first place. Acceptable losses defined by proximity to the problem rather than by any measure of human value. Where's Jesse now? If you enjoy zombie survival stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Stay with us for more intense new stories. Thank you. She barricaded herself in Fenn's office. She's on the internal comm system. She's scared, Elliot. She's 26 years old, and she's locked in a room while her colleagues deteriorate on the other side of the door. I was dressed and moving in 90 seconds. Tomas met us in the corridor. He'd been monitoring the air handling data through the night and had watched the sub-level 3 readings cross every threshold he'd modeled as theoretical worst case. The viral load in the sub-level 3 common areas is now equivalent to what we measured in the vivarium after Subject 19's event, he said. Anyone breathing that air without respiratory protection is receiving a direct inoculation-level dose with every breath. Jesse. Fenn's office has a separate ventilation feed from the prep corridor. It's not clean, but it's diluted. She has hours, maybe a day, before her exposure reaches critical. We reached the sub-level 3 access stairwell and found it sealed with a magnetic lock that required Hargrove's personal authorization code. Standing beside the door was one of the Ashcroft security contractors, not Dennis, but one of the unnamed tactical men, armed now with a sidearm that he wore with the ease of long familiarity. "This level is restricted," he said. "There's an uninfected person trapped inside," I replied. "The containment order is non-negotiable." Lena stepped forward. She had a particular way of occupying space when she needed authority. Not aggressive, but absolute, as though the air around her had been reclassified as her jurisdiction. "I designed the agent that is currently rewriting the neurological architecture of everyone on the other side of that door. If you don't let me through, you will have no one capable of assessing the progression rate, identifying a neutralization pathway, or determining whether this containment will hold past the next 6 hours. Call Hargrove. Tell him Dr. Corrin is requesting access with a 2-person clinical team." The contractor looked at her for a long moment, then radioed in. The response came in 40 seconds. Access granted for Corrin and Rains, not Tomas. "I'll work from up here," Tomas said, gripping my arm briefly. "I'll keep modeling. If the air systems compromise sub-level 2, I'll trigger the building evacuation myself. Hargrove's authority or not?" I nodded. The magnetic lock disengaged with a sound like a bone setting. The stairwell beyond was lit in emergency amber, a color the facility used to designate biologically compromised zones. Each step downward felt like a descent measured not in floors, but in reversibility. Above this door, we were scientists dealing with a problem. Below it, we would become something else. Lena went first. I followed. The door sealed behind us, with a finality that reorganized the shape of the remaining days of my life. Though I wouldn't understand how completely until much later. Sub-level 3 smelled wrong. Not the copper ammonia signature from the vivarium. This was different. Warmer, organic. The ventilation system was still cycling air, but whatever it was circulating had passed through lungs that were no longer operating under normal biological parameters. I pulled my N95 respirator tighter and knew it was insufficient. Knew it the way you know a raincoat won't help in a flood. The gesture matters, the protection doesn't. The corridor was empty, but not quiet. From Primate Housing Block A, a rhythmic sound. Not vocalization, not impact, but something between. A tonal resonance, as if dozens of throats were producing a frequency just below the range of normal hearing. I felt it in my sternum before I heard it with my ears. Lena moved with purpose toward Fenn's office, navigating the corridor from memory. We passed the Block A observation window without stopping, but I looked. I couldn't help it. The macaques had changed. They were no longer standing in formation. They were moving, slowly, deliberately, in a circular pattern within their enclosures, each animal tracing the same orbit at the same speed, like components of a single distributed mechanism. "Don't watch them," Lena said without turning around. "The behavioral patterns are designed to capture attention. It's part of the aggression cascade. The agent optimizes the host for predatory engagement, which includes fixation behaviors that draw observation. Designed to capture attention. You built a predator that baits its prey by being interesting to look at." "I didn't build it. I built the foundation. The agent built itself from there." We reached Fenn's office. Lena knocked in a specific pattern. 3, pause, 2. And a voice from inside said, "Prove you're not one of them." "Jesse, it's Dr. Corin and Dr. Rains. We're from Sub-Level 2. We came through the sealed stairwell with Hargrove's authorization. Rodriguez could talk fine for the first 2 hours after he changed. Talking doesn't prove anything." She had a point. Through the door's narrow reinforced window, I could see Jessie Park. Small, sharp-featured, her black hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She was standing behind Fenn's desk, holding a fire extinguisher like a weapon. And her eyes had the wild clarity of a person who had been afraid for long enough that the fear had crystallized into something functional. "Ask me something only I would know," I said. "You brought lemon poppy seed muffins to the December meeting and apologized because they were store-bought. What store?" "Jesse, I didn't bring muffins. You did. I brought coffee. From the place on Birch Street with the misspelled sign." A pause. The lock clicked. The door opened 6 inches, and one dark eye evaluated us through the gap before it opened fully. The office was a controlled disaster. Filing cabinets pushed against the secondary door, the desk overturned as a barrier. Ventilation grate covered with plastic sheeting and packing tape. Jessie had been engineering her survival with whatever was available, and the result was crude but coherent. She'd bought herself time. "Where's Dr. Fenn?" Lena asked. "Down the hall. He went to check on Rodriguez and Kwame 4 hours ago. I heard conversation for the first 20 minutes. Then I heard something that wasn't conversation." She set the extinguisher down, but kept it within reach. Then nothing. For 3 hours. Then footsteps, slow even, back and forth in the corridor. Not searching, patrolling. Patrolling? Like the monkeys. The same rhythm, the same pattern. Her voice cracked on the last word, a fracture she immediately sealed. "Dr. Corin, what did you people make?" Lena sat down on the edge of the desk, and for the first time in the 5 years I'd known her, she looked like someone confronting the full weight of a consequence she'd calculated abstractly, but never felt. Her hands were steady, but her breathing was measured in a way that told me she was controlling it manually. "Something that was supposed to stay theoretical," she said. "That's not an answer." "No, but it's the truth. The full answer would take hours we don't have and would require me to explain decisions I can no longer justify. What matters now is getting you out of this level and determining whether the agent can be neutralized." "Can it?" Lena didn't answer. And in the silence, from somewhere down the corridor, I heard footsteps. Slow, even, patrolling. We had to move. Fenn's office was survivable as a temporary shelter, but non-viable as a long-term position. The ventilation seal Jessie had improvised was slowing her exposure, not preventing it. And every minute we spent breathing sub-level 3's air was a minute closer to our own threshold event. Lena calculated we had approximately 8 hours before our respiratory exposure reached the level that had triggered behavioral changes in Fenn's team, assuming the N95s were providing 70% filtration. She said this with the clinical detachment of someone reading a weather forecast, which was both reassuring and deeply disturbing. "We go up," I said. "Back through the stairwell. Get Jessie to sub-level 2, where the air is still clean, then reassess." The stairwell requires reauthorization from the security post, Lena reminded me. And the contractor won't open it without a comm request. I tried the internal comm panel in Fenn's office. Dead. Jesse had disconnected it 3 hours ago after the voice coming through it stopped being Dr. Fenn's and started being something that used Dr. Fenn's vocabulary in arrangements that didn't follow human conversational logic. "He was asking me to open the door," she said. But the sentences were assembled wrong, like someone had taken his words apart and rebuilt them based on statistical probability rather than meaning. The grammar was perfect. The intention behind it was hollow. We had 2 options: reach the stairwell and signal the contractor, or find an alternate route to sublevel 2. The facility's emergency schematics, pinned to Fenn's wall, showed a service shaft connecting sublevel 3's mechanical room to the sublevel 2 server corridor. It was designed for cable maintenance, not personnel, but it was passable. Lena favored the stairwell. Jesse favored the shaft. I looked at the schematics and made a decision based on geometry rather than preference. The stairwell was 90 meters down the main corridor, past the primate wings and through the common area where Fenn and his team had last been seen. The mechanical room was 30 meters in the opposite direction through the storage wing. Shorter path, lower exposure time, fewer unknowns. We moved in single file. Lena first. She knew the layout. Me in the middle, Jesse at the rear carrying the fire extinguisher with a grip that suggested she'd use it without hesitation and with precision. The storage wing was narrow and lined with shelving units stacked with supply crates, sample containers, and the accumulated material debris of a research facility that had been operational for 12 years. The overhead lights here were on a motion-activated system, which meant they ignited in sequence as we moved, creating a cascading illumination that announced our position to anything paying attention. 30 meters. We covered 20 without incident. The air was thicker here, warmer, saturated with that organic smells that I was beginning to associate not with decay, but with transformation. Something metabolic was happening in the bodies of the infected, and the byproduct was detectable. A signature, a broadcast. At 24 meters, Lena stopped. She held up a hand, and I relayed the gesture to Jesse. In the pool of newly triggered light ahead of us, a figure stood in the corridor. Dr. Gerald Fenn, 61 years old, 23 years in primate cognition research. A man who kept photographs of his grandchildren taped to his monitor and who once delayed a departmental meeting by 15 minutes to finish telling a story about his daughter's wedding. He was standing in the center of the corridor with his arms at his sides and his head tilted approximately 15 degrees to the right. His eyes were open. His expression was neutral, not blank, not aggressive, but resolved, as though every question his face had ever carried had been answered simultaneously, and the answers had made further expression unnecessary. He wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the ceiling, at the ventilation grate directly above him. "He's tracking the airflow," Lena whispered. "Why?" "Because the agent has optimized his sensory prioritization. Air movement tells him where uninfected respiratory systems are operating. He's hunting by scent, Elliot. By breath." Fenn's head descended slowly from the ceiling to the horizontal. His eyes found us with a mechanical precision that owed nothing to recognition and everything to acquisition. He smiled. And it was the worst smile I've ever seen, because it contained every component of warmth except the warmth itself. Nobody moved for 7 seconds. 7 seconds during which the fluorescent lights buzzed with their indifferent frequency and Dr. Gerald Fenn stood smiling at us with a face that no longer belonged to him. Then Jessie acted. She didn't swing the fire extinguisher. She discharged it. A blast of monoammonium phosphate directly at Fenn's face from 8 meters. The chemical cloud engulfed him in a white curtain. And for a moment, he was erased from the corridor, replaced by a billowing opacity that swallowed light and sound. "Move!" Jesse shouted, and we moved. Not forward through the cloud, but sideways, through a storage room door that Lena shouldered open. We tumbled inside, and I slammed the door and threw the manual bolt. Through the door's wire mesh window, I watched the chemical cloud settle. Fenn was still standing. The powder coated him like a plaster death mask, filling every crease and contour. His smile hadn't changed. But he wasn't advancing. He was recalibrating. Head tilting again, nostrils working, processing the new chemical obstacle in his sensory field. "It disrupted his olfactory tracking," Lena said. "He can't smell us through the powder. It bought minutes." Minutes. Jessie sat on a crate, the empty extinguisher across her knees. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. "How far to the mechanical room?" 6 meters past him. "Then we need another route." The storage room had a second door, a loading access that connected to the mechanical corridor through a narrow service passage. Lena found it behind a rack of empty specimen containers. It was locked with a physical key, not an electronic system. And the key was on a ring mounted to the wall. Small blessings in a building designed by people who believed physical infrastructure was beneath the sophistication of their mission. We entered the service passage single file. It was barely shoulder width, lined with cable trays and junction boxes, lit by a single strip of emergency LEDs that painted everything in cadaver blue. The air here was marginally cooler. The passage ran parallel to an exterior wall, and the insulation was thinner, allowing the late autumn cold to seep through the concrete. Lena moved fast. Jessie matched her. I brought up the rear, watching behind us for movement in the blue-lit corridor. Nothing followed. Fenn was still in the main corridor, still processing, still recalibrating. The fire extinguisher had given us a window, and we were spending it efficiently. The mechanical room was a cathedral of infrastructure. Floor-to-ceiling HVAC units, water treatment modules, electrical distribution panels, and the building's central air handling system, which dominated the far wall like an industrial altar. The service shaft was in the northeast corner, a vertical channel 2 feet wide and 6 feet deep, studded with cable anchors that could serve as handholds. Lena looked up the shaft. Sub-level 2 was 1 floor above, approximately 12 feet of vertical climb. She tested the lowest anchor, which held. Then she tested the second, which shifted but held. Then the third. "I'll go first. Test each anchor. Jessie follows. Elliot, you're last." "I should be last because I'm the heaviest and the anchors are degrading." "You should be last because if something comes through that door, I need the person who understands the vector to already be above it." I wanted to argue. I didn't, because she was right, and because the calculus of survival had already begun replacing the calculus of courtesy. Lena climbed. She moved with a competence that surprised me, not because I doubted her capability, but because the transition from molecular virologist to someone scaling a vertical service shaft in an infected building was a metamorphosis that should have required more time than we'd had. But crisis compresses adaptation. You become what survival requires, or you don't become anything at all. She reached the sub-level 2 access panel in under a minute and forced it open with a maintenance tool she'd pulled from a junction box on the way up. Light flooded down. Normal fluorescent, clean and white and ordinary. The most beautiful illumination I'd ever seen. "Clear," she called down. "The server corridor is empty. Come up." Jessie went next. She left the fire extinguisher at the base of the shaft, couldn't carry it and climb, and ascended with the urgent efficiency of a person who understood that the gap between safe and not safe was measured in seconds and inches. Then it was my turn. I put my hands on the first anchor, and from the mechanical room door behind me, I heard a sound. Rhythmic, slow, even. Patrolling. I climbed faster than I'd ever moved in my life. The cable anchors bit into my palms, each rung a small negotiation between grip and gravity. And I pulled myself through the sub-level 2 access panel as Lena and Jesse hauled me onto the server corridor floor. Below us, through the open shaft, I heard the mechanical room door open. Not forced, opened. With the keycard reader. Someone, or something that had been someone, still retained enough procedural memory to use facility access systems. Lena slammed the access panel shut and secured it with a cable tie threaded through the latch. It wouldn't hold against sustained force, but it restored the illusion of a boundary, and illusions were the currency we were trading in now. Sub-level 2 was still clean. The air tasted different, sterile, processed, free of the organic warmth that had permeated level 3. Tomas was waiting for us in the server corridor. He'd been tracking our movement through the facility's internal sensor grid, watching 3 biosignatures navigate toward the shaft. And his face when he saw Jesse, alive, uninfected, carrying the particular expression of someone who had crossed a border they would never recross, carried a relief that was almost parental. "Fenn's team?" he asked. "Fully compromised," Lena said. 3 confirmed. Behavioral presentation matches the primate pattern, but with higher order cognitive retention. Fenn still navigates. He uses access systems. He tracks by olfactory input. Tomas absorbed this. Then containment on sub-level 3 is effectively irrelevant. If the infected retain facility access capabilities, locked doors are a delay, not a barrier. We gathered in the commissary, Lena, Thomas, Jesse, Nina, and me. 5 people. The rest of Meridian's staff were on sub-level 1 and the surface level, separated from us by the stairwells and elevator systems that Hargrove's lockdown had partitioned into isolated segments. Communication with the upper levels was limited to the internal comm system, which routed through the security desk. I called up. Dennis answered again, his shift apparently eternal now, the normal rotation abandoned. "Dennis, we have confirmed human infection on sub-level 3. 3 personnel are compromised. We evacuated 1 uninfected staff member. I need to speak with Hargrove immediately." "Mr. Hargrove left the facility 2 hours ago, Dr. Rains." The room went silent. Left. Hargrove had left. The man controlling the containment response had departed the building he was supposed to be containing. Left to where? I don't have that information. He and Ms. Chen departed via the surface vehicle bay at 2:15 a.m. He transferred security authority to Dr. Hale before leaving. Marcus. I called his extension. He picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said. The 3rd time in 4 days, I'd heard those words deployed as a shield instead of an acknowledgement. Hargrove decided the situation exceeded his organizational mandate. He's en route to Ashcroft's Regional Coordination Center to brief their crisis directorate. He ran. He escalated. Don't tell me there's a difference. Marcus exhaled. On the other end of the line, I heard the particular silence of a man sitting alone in a room he no longer believed he controlled. "Elliot. I have 14 people on sub-level 1 and the surface level. 7 are research staff, 4 are support, 3 are security contractors. None of them know the full scope of what's happening below them. Hargrove's instructions were to maintain containment and await Ashcroft's response team. When does the response team arrive? He didn't specify. Because there is no response team, Marcus. Ashcroft built this thing as a weapon. When a weapon escapes containment, you don't send a repair crew. You send a cleanup crew, and they won't be coming to rescue us. They'll be coming to sterilize the site. The line was quiet for 8 seconds. Then Marcus said, "What do you need?" "Access to the level 4 cold storage. Lena says the original NRX-7 culture stocks are there, along with the binding architecture data. If there's a way to develop a countermeasure, it starts with those materials. Sub-level 4 has been in full lockdown since Tuesday. Nobody's been down there. Then it's the cleanest place in the building. Open it, Marcus, before someone else makes that decision for us." Marcus opened sub-level 4 at 6:30 a.m. Friday. The lockdown seals disengaged in sequence, a cascading series of electromagnetic releases that echoed through the stairwell like vertebrae cracking. Lena and I descended together, wearing full-face respirators pulled from the emergency supply cache on sub-level 2. Tomas remained above with Jesse and Nina, monitoring the sub-level 3 sensor grid for movement that might indicate the infected were attempting to breach upward. Sub-level 4 was exactly as I'd last seen it. Sterile, ordered, undisturbed. Vivarium C still held the empty, blood-stained cages of the NRX-7 cohort. The polycarbonate crack in cage 7R now sealed with biosafety tape that Marcus had applied on Tuesday. It felt like returning to the scene of a crime after the investigation had moved on. The evidence still present, but the urgency relocated to larger theaters. The cold storage was at the end of the main corridor, a reinforced room maintained at -80 degrees Celsius, containing the biological materials that constituted the core of everything we'd built and everything we'd unleashed. Lena entered the access code, and the door opened with a hydraulic whisper. Inside, ranked in frost-coated racks, were the NRX-7 culture stocks, 12 vials of concentrated viral preparation, each containing approximately 10 billion viral particles optimized for human neuronal binding. Alongside them, in a separate rack, were the component materials, the lentiviral backbone, the binding peptides, the neural targeting sequences that I'd spent 18 months designing in the belief that I was creating a tool for understanding neurodegeneration. Lena moved through the inventory with practiced efficiency, pulling vials and placing them in a portable cryogenic carrier. But she wasn't taking the NRX-7 stocks. She was reaching past them, to a rack I'd never accessed. A secondary set of vials marked with a designation I didn't recognize. CRX-1. "What is that?" I asked. "The countermeasure." She held a vial up to the light. The liquid inside was amber, not the clear preparation I was accustomed to. "I started developing it 6 months ago. An inhibitory construct designed to compete for the same neural binding sites as NRX-7. It doesn't reverse the infection. Nothing can once the neural rewriting is complete. But in pre-symptomatic subjects, it should block the binding cascade and prevent full expression. You had a countermeasure for 6 months, and you didn't tell anyone." I told Hargrove. He told me to shelve it. A weapon without a countermeasure is a bomb. A weapon with a countermeasure is a controllable asset. He wanted the countermeasure to exist, but only under Ashcroft's control. The implications unfolded like origami in reverse, each fold revealing a layer of institutional calculation that transformed every decision of the past year into something smaller and more cynical than I'd understood. Hargrove hadn't been managing a containment failure. He'd been managing an asset evaluation. The outbreak on sub-level 3 wasn't a disaster from his perspective. It was a field test. "How much CRX-1 do you have?" "Enough for maybe 15 doses. It's never been tested in humans." "It's been tested in primates. In 2 macaques, outside the main colony, in a private session that I ran myself 3 months ago. Both showed complete binding site blockade within 4 hours of administration. No behavioral changes, no side effects. Two primates, which is 2 more data points than we have for doing nothing. She was right, and I hated that she was right. And I hated more that the reason she was right was because every legitimate pathway for testing and validating this countermeasure had been sealed off by the same institutional machinery that had created the need for it. We loaded the CRX-1 into the carrier alongside basic lab equipment. Pipettes, syringes, sterile saline, a portable centrifuge. If we were going to convert Lena's prototype into a deployable countermeasure, we'd need to work fast and with materials that were designed for precision and not improvisation. As we left the cold storage, I paused at Vivarium C. Cage 7 stood empty, the polycarbonate crack visible beneath the biosafety tape. The beginning of everything. A single mouse, pressing against a wall, waiting for it to give. The walls were giving now. All of them. And we were on the wrong side. We set up an improvised lab in the sub-level 2 conference room, the largest available space with a locking door and adequate ventilation. Nina took charge of the preparation protocol. Her immunology background making her the most qualified to adapt Lena's CRX-1 from a research-grade preparation to something injectable in human tissue. Jessie assisted with a focus and competence that transcended her junior status. Crisis had compressed her into the scientist she would have become in 5 years under normal conditions. Thomas monitored the facility from the server corridor, tracking the infected on sub-level 3 through motion sensors and air quality data. His updates came every 30 minutes, delivered with the cadence of a meteorologist tracking a storm system. 3 biosignatures, all mobile, concentrated near the Block A junction. Airborne viral load at 37% above the 8-hour human threshold. The infected are moving in coordinated patterns, converging on the stairwell access points. They were testing the doors. Not randomly, systematically. Each sealed access point was approached, evaluated, and cataloged by infected minds that retained enough procedural intelligence to map the facility's architecture as a puzzle to be solved. By Friday afternoon, Nina had prepared 12 doses of CRX-1, diluted and stabilized for intramuscular injection. The remaining 3 vials were held in reserve as reference stock. She'd worked for 7 straight hours, her movements precise and unhurried despite the pressure. And when she set the final syringe in its case, she removed her gloves and stood with the particular exhaustion of someone who had completed a task she wasn't sure would matter. 12 doses, she said, for 19 uninfected people. 12 down here, she corrected herself. 5 down here. 14 on the upper levels, assuming nobody else has been exposed. The math was a blade. 12 doses, 19 people. 7 would go unprotected. We could dilute further, Jessie suggested. Reduce the per-dose concentration and stretch to 19. Below a certain threshold, the binding site competition won't be sufficient, Lena said. We'd protect no one instead of 12. Then who decides? I asked. The question landed in the center of the room like a dropped glass. Everyone saw it. No one wanted to touch the pieces. We administered 5 doses immediately, 1 each for our group. The injection was straightforward. Intramuscular deltoid, a sharp sting followed by a warmth that spread through the shoulder and faded within minutes. Whether it was working was unknowable in the moment. We were prophylactically blocking a disease we hadn't yet confirmed we'd been exposed to. Using a countermeasure tested on exactly 2 primates by the woman who designed the weapon it was meant to counter. The remaining 7 doses needed to reach sub-level 1. Marcus and his 14 people were separated from us by a stairwell that ran through the compromised sub-level 3 junction. Going through was not an option. Going around required using the facility's external service corridor, a utility passage that ran along the building's outer shell, connecting each sub-level independently of the internal stairwells. It was unheated, unmonitored, and accessible through a maintenance hatch in the sub-level 2 mechanical closet. "I'll take them up," I said. "Not alone," Lena replied. "Someone needs to stay with the lab and the remaining stock. If I don't make it, the 5 of us down here are protected. Nina can replicate the preparation if you can source more CRX-1 from cold storage. And if you encounter infected in the service corridor? It's external, unventilated, exposed to outside air. The viral load should be negligible." "Should be, based on models we built this week for a pathogen we didn't know existed last Tuesday." She wasn't wrong. But the 7 doses in my bag represented the entire margin between sub-level 1 remaining a refuge and becoming another compromised zone. Every hour that Marcus's people breathed untreated air was an hour closer to the threshold that had taken Fenn's team. Jesse handed me a flashlight. Tomas handed me a facility radio. Nina handed me a map of the service corridor she'd pulled from the emergency schematics, annotated with ventilation points and structural junctions. Lena handed me nothing. She just looked at me with an expression that contained everything we hadn't said to each other in 5 years of working side by side. And the weight of it was heavier than the bag of syringes on my shoulder. I opened the maintenance hatch and stepped into the cold. The external service corridor was a concrete artery running along the spine of the building, unfinished, unpainted, lit by caged industrial bulbs spaced every 10 meters. The temperature was near freezing. My breath crystallized in front of me, and the cold seeped through my lab coat within seconds. But the air was clean. For the first time in 2 days, I was breathing something that wasn't trying to rewrite my brain. The corridor ascended gradually, following the building's contour from sub-level 2 to sub-level 1. The distance was approximately 200 meters, interrupted by junction points where utility lines branched into the facility's interior. Each junction was sealed with a pressure door, manual, mechanical, independent of the facility's electronic systems, the kind of infrastructure that exists because buildings are designed by engineers who believe in redundancy, even when the people who commission those buildings believe in nothing but efficiency. I moved quickly. The flashlight supplemented the caged bulbs, casting my shadow long and shifting on the concrete walls. The radio crackled periodically with Thomas's voice, checking in, confirming my position relative to the sensor grid, relaying data that was both useful and grounding. His voice was a tether to a version of reality where people communicated in complete sentences about measurable things. At the 100-meter mark, I reached the junction corresponding to sub-level 3's eastern wall. The pressure door here was different from the others, newer, reinforced, fitted with a secondary seal that hadn't been part of the original construction. Someone had upgraded this junction specifically to provide additional separation between the service corridor and the compromised level. Marcus, probably. One of his quiet, meticulous preparations that nobody noticed until they were the only thing standing between survival and oblivion. I paused at the door. Through the metal, I heard nothing. But the door was warm to the touch. Warmer than the surrounding concrete. Warmer than any door should be in an unheated passage. Something on the other side was generating thermal output. Something metabolic. Something alive and changed. I moved past it without stopping. The sub-level 1 access point was a maintenance hatch identical to the one I'd entered through. A steel panel secured with a wheel lock. I turned it, and the hatch opened into a storage room lined with cleaning supplies and spare equipment. Through the storage room door, I entered the sub-level 1 corridor and found Marcus waiting. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in 4 days. His reading glasses hung on their chain. His eyes, without them, appeared exposed and vulnerable, like windows stripped of curtains. Behind him, arranged in the corridor with the uncertain discipline of people who had been organized by authority but not yet tested by crisis, were his 14 charges: 7 researchers, 4 support staff, 3 security contractors. "Elliot." He gripped my hand. Not a handshake, a hold. "Status below? Sub-level 3 is lost. 3 infected, behaviorally advanced, retaining facility navigation capabilities. Sub-level 4 is clean. Sub-level 2 is our operational base. Lena developed a countermeasure, CRX-1, experimental, prophylactic, binding site competition. I have 7 doses." His gaze went to the bag. 7. 12 total, 5 administered to our team. 7 remaining, for 14 people. The arithmetic settled over the corridor like a sentence. 14 people, 7 doses. Marcus looked at his group. The researchers who trusted the institution, the support staff who cleaned and maintained the spaces where the weapon was built, the contractors who'd signed on for security and gotten containment. "I'll decide," he said. "Not by rank, by exposure risk." The 3 contractors have been cycling through the stairwell checkpoints closest to sub-level 3. They get first priority. Then the 4 support staff. They've been handling materials from the lower levels without respiratory protection. That's 7. That's 7. He looked at the research staff, who were listening with the particular stillness of people hearing their own value being calculated. The researchers have been confined to the upper offices with independent ventilation. Their exposure is lowest. I'll brief them on the situation and the math. "And you?" Marcus touched his glasses chain. "I've been down to sub-level 3 twice since Tuesday. I sealed the air junction myself. Stood in that corridor for 20 minutes, breathing whatever was in it." He was already exposed. He was making the calculation with himself already on the other side of the equation. Saturday through Sunday, days 5, 6, and 7, collapsed into a single continuous state of managed deterioration. Marcus administered the 7 doses and then locked himself in the sub-level 1 infirmary for voluntary isolation, monitoring himself for symptoms with the clinical rigor of a man performing his own autopsy in advance. He reported to me hourly by radio. Vital signs stable, cognition clear, no behavioral anomalies. But his voice carried a quality I recognized from Jesse's account of Fenn. A measured precision that might have been discipline, or might have been the early architecture of something replacing discipline with a more efficient structure. On sub-level 2, Lena worked continuously on the CRX-1 data, attempting to reverse engineer a more potent formulation from the remaining reference stock. Nina assisted, her steady hands and encyclopedic knowledge of immune cascades complementing Lena's frenetic brilliance. Jesse coordinated communications between levels, serving as the connective tissue of our fragmented community with a natural authority that made her nominal junior status irrelevant. Tomas tracked the infected. By Saturday evening, the 3 compromised individuals on sub-level 3, Fenn, Rodriguez, and Kwame, had breached the internal stairwell separating sub-level 3 from sub-level 2. Not by force, by access code. Fenn had retained his security credentials, and the infected, working with the coordinated patience of their primate predecessors, had systematically attempted combinations at the sealed doors until they found one that Marcus had failed to override when Hargrove's departure had disrupted the command hierarchy. We abandoned sub-level 2 at 3 a.m. Sunday. The evacuation was orderly only because Tomas had given us 17 minutes of warning, the time between the first sensor alert and the infected reaching our corridor. We carried the CRX-1 stock, the lab equipment, and the data drives containing Lena's research. We left everything else. We ascended through the service corridor to sub-level 1, and I sealed the maintenance hatch behind us with every physical barrier available. On sub-level 1, Marcus's people absorbed us with the grim hospitality of a lifeboat crew accepting more passengers. 20 people now, in a space designed for operations, but not for siege. The surface exit was accessible. Meridian's main entrance, 50 meters above us, opening onto a parking lot in a wooded research campus in rural Virginia. Outside was the world. Outside was air that hadn't been contaminated, and sunlight that didn't buzz with fluorescent indifference. But outside, by Sunday morning, was also no longer safe. Tomas had maintained a passive internet connection through Meridian's external antenna. The news feeds told the story in fragments, unexplained behavioral outbreaks in 3 metropolitan areas, aggressive incidents in populations with no prior history, quarantine zones established, then overrun. The language was familiar, the same euphemistic architecture that Ashcroft used internally, scaled to national communication. Behavioral anomaly, enhanced containment, coordinated response. Hargrove hadn't gone to brief a crisis directorate. He'd gone because he knew. The weapon hadn't just escaped sub-level 4 or sub-level 3 or even Meridian. The air handling system's external exhaust vented to the atmosphere. It had been venting since Tuesday. 4 days of aerosolized NRX-7 carried on Virginia wind patterns across the eastern seaboard, seeding the agent into population centers with every weather system that crossed the region. We hadn't failed to contain the outbreak. The outbreak had been containing us, keeping us focused inward while the real transmission happened silently, invisibly, through the ordinary mechanism of a building breathing. I found Lena in the sub-level 1 break room, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, holding a vial of CRX-1 up to the light. The amber liquid caught the fluorescence and glowed like a small, trapped sunrise. "Can you scale it?" I asked. "With the right equipment, a real lab, manufacturing capacity." She lowered the vial. "It's a blueprint, Elliot. Not a solution. But it's the only blueprint anyone has. Then we go outside, into a world that's already infected, into a world that has no countermeasure. We have one. That makes us the most important people alive." She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the same calculation that had started all of this. The belief that the right knowledge, applied with sufficient precision, could reshape the architecture of disaster. It had been her flaw and her genius. Now it was our only remaining resource. We opened the door on the 7th day, not to escape, to begin. I carried 2 things out of Meridian: the cryogenic case with 9 remaining vials of CRX-1, packed in dry ice that will last another 48 hours before the compound degrades, and the knowledge of what I helped build. Not the weapon itself, but the foundation it was built on. My vector, my binding architecture, my 18 months of elegant, meticulous work, designed to understand the human brain and repurposed to dismantle it. The world outside is still recognizable. Trees, roads, sky. But the silence is wrong. The particular absence of sound that occurs when systems designed to generate constant noise have stopped functioning. No traffic drone, no aircraft, no ambient hum of civilization processing itself. We are 20 people on a loading dock in Virginia with a prototype countermeasure and the complete technical knowledge of the pathogen that is rewriting human neurology across the continent. Lena walks beside me. Thomas maps our route. Jesse carries supplies with hands that no longer shake. Nina catalogs our medical resources. Marcus stayed behind. His last radio transmission was calm, precise, and final. I don't know if we can fix this. I know that we are the only ones who understand it well enough to try. That will have to be enough. It didn't start outside, but outside is where it ends. Share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. To hear more new zombie stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon. Thank you.